Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Vivian Schiller. I'm the executive director of Aspen Digital. We're a program of the Aspen Institute that focuses on technology and innovation and media, and lately AI, and its impact on just about everything in the world. So I know some of you on this call, just having gone down the list of people who are already online. So as you know, my background is as a journalist, more than 30 years in often in executive leadership in news organizations before joining the Aspen Institute. But once a journalist, always a journalist. That's who I am in my core. And so this project is particularly exciting to me. We set out to help journalists across different beats who were first encountering artificial intelligence after the blast furnace known a year ago, known as the launch of ChatGPT. Many people who were not familiar with AI were sort of struggling on what the stories were, how to cover it. So we did a bunch of work on that, including releasing 3 different primers or primers, depending on what generation you come from, about artificial intelligence. We're going to drop the links to those in the chat. But the funny thing happened along the way. As more and more people encountered our primers, and as we spoke to folks, the feedback we were getting was, you know what? It's not just journalists that need this. A lot of folks need help sort of understanding AI and understanding how to talk about AI. And so we want to serve those communities as well, and more directly. So in our session today, you're going to hear from some absolutely fantastic speakers, experts in education, nonprofits, government, and of course, from news media. So we're really excited about this program. We hope that it will be useful to you. We particularly want to thank our colleagues at the Siegel Family Endowment for supporting this work. Before I turn it over to our first session, I just want to mention that this is just one of many, many, many programs that we're doing on AI. If you have signed up for this session, or if you're maybe watching it after the fact, feel free to sign up for our newsletter. We will drop a link to that in the chat as well. We're doing a lot of work around the intersection of artificial intelligence and labor, on the impact on elections and democracy, on US and global policy, the intersection of AI and cybersecurity, basically anything having to do with AI in the public interest, which is what motivates us and gets us out of bed to work on every day. So with that, thanks again for being here. I am now going to introduce my colleague, Eleanor Tursman, who is our emerging tech researcher, and she's going to kick us off with our first panel. Eleanor, over to you.
Thank you, Vivian. To kick things off, we're going to be hearing from 3 great panelists from government, nonprofits, and philanthropy about how they navigate talking about AI in the course of their work. So first, I'd like to introduce you all to Victoria Houed. Victoria is an engineer turned policy entrepreneur who has dedicated her career to improving the tech policy ecosystem and the modernization of government. In 2023, she joined the US Department of Commerce as the Director of AI Policy and Strategy. She also has worked at PopVox, Schmidt Futures, and advised Speaker Pelosi's office on all things tech. Next, I'd like to introduce you all to Alex Kotran. Alex oversees strategy, partnerships, fundraising, and external relations for the AI Education Project. Prior to founding the AI Education Project, he built the AI Ethics and Corporate Social Responsibility function for H5 Inc., a pioneering AI company in the legal services sector. Prior to H5, he managed brand and policy communications for a number of major companies. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Clarence Wardell III. Clarence is a change maker committed to harnessing the power of technology, data, and evidence to create positive social impact and achieve more equitable societal outcomes. He's a senior program officer on the Economic Mobility and Opportunity team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he leads the team's efforts to foster innovation to improve economic outcomes for individuals in the United States with low incomes. Before joining the foundation, Clarence served in several senior roles in the Biden-Harris administration and on the transition team. So those are our lovely panelists, and we will save 10 minutes at the end of this section for Q&A. So please submit questions using the Q&A feature. throughout this event, and we will answer as many as we can at the end. So to kick things off, I'd like to hear from each of our panelists about how AI is showing up in your work and what kinds of people you need to communicate with about AI. Clarence, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Eleanor. And thanks to the Aspen Digital team for having us here today. Really excited for this conversation. Um, Obviously, very timely, and will continue to be so. So maybe I'll just say a little bit. So both in my current role and as you mentioned, kind of prior to joining the foundation, worked in the first 2 years of the Biden-Harris administration. Primarily with the Domestic Policy Council and the American Rescue Plan implementation team. Kind of in both cases, kind of current role, and I'll get into that a little bit more, but certainly within the administration, had an opportunity to help lead key pieces of the president's equity agenda and work, both inclusive of his day one equity EO, as well as some of the other threads there. And was really fortunate while working on the Domestic Policy Council, which was the lead for the equity work, to help co-lead a process along with our colleagues at the Office of Science and Technology Policy on equity and AI across the federal government. It was a process that ultimately led to the publication of the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights. And so in that case, very, and this continues to be so, I think, you know, on one end of the spectrum, right, there's certainly kind of a lot of, I would say, like alarmist conversation around AI, especially the fairly recent breakthroughs mentioned earlier around GPT, and what it portends for the future, whether that's displacement of work, working workers, as well as some more existential threats around what folks are concerned about. Um, but in that context, I think we also see and are very hopeful around the opportunities that these tools could create. And I hope we, have some space and time to have a conversation about that. I think there's a lot of things kind of in the near term where there's some really awesome opportunities to maybe close some of the economic divides. I think that would depend on, guardrails around use, how we, and, as a society, how we decide to deploy, experiment, test in ways that are ethical and responsible. And so, that AI Bill of Rights, which was kind of a precursor, as folks know, to, in many ways, much more expanded, and I think one of the longest executive orders in the history of the country. It's the AI Executive Order. But really they're really focused on in the conversation really centered around great, there's a lot of opportunity that is held here. How do we ensure, again, create the appropriate guardrails, learn as we go, and not repeat many of the mistakes that we have in the past where I think, we've seen technology kind of be applied in ways that limit opportunities, infringe on people's civil rights, et cetera. So that was really kind of the goal of the Bill of Rights. Engaged, we could get more into it, across, and that was like across the government, right? Every agency, lots of sub agencies, there's not an agency place in the federal government, that was not and will not be affected in the constituents in which they work with that won't be affected by these tools and technologies. So that was one
Right.
piece. A lot of that is translated into the foundation. My role, I sit on our economic mobility and opportunity team. We make investments that try to improve both the near-term economic security and long-term mobility outcomes for folks 200% or below the federal poverty line. I lead our innovation, R&D, and training and worker supports portfolio. So in a very similar way, focused on, again, how are we, oftentimes what happens is a lot of the innovation happens, in the places where people have the resources to pay for these tools, technologies. Kind of our end is like, how do we not, again, repeat that? How do we shorten that lag? How do we start to design from the beginning and support folks that are working with folks in our focus population to understand how these things can be best applied for their needs, right? So how do we go from that like broad scale promise for a lot of these tools to actually making that practical and in practice? And that has to begin with the folks that we hope to deliver value from these tools and products. So
Right.
that's a lot of my kind of day to day, and where I tend to think about the promise of these tools.
So you're kind of working not only with communicating to the general public about these tools, but also have worked communicating to different agencies and kind of more at the federal level, how to communicate
Agencies on
about
the
AI.
federal
Yeah,
side, a lot of time spent with like nonprofits now
right,
and organizations who may not have the technical skill set, but know
right.
that there's something here for the folks that they work with.
Amazing. Yes, thank you. Victoria, how is AI showing up in your work, and who are the types of folks that you are communicating about AI with?
Yeah, definitely. So I am, as mentioned, working at the Department of Commerce. I solely or mostly work with our chief data officer on kind of thinking through our data strategy as it relates to AI. And so I'm currently leading a working group on AI and open government data assets. So basically, like, we're thinking through, what does it mean to have AI ready data? So when we're thinking about like how people interact with a lot of these large language models like ChatGPT and Bard, what kind of data are they actually seeing, and can they be using all of our very accurate information, for example, like our census data, our NOAA data? When someone asks, like, tell me about the demographics of Washington, D.C., right now it'll either give you super outdated information, or it'll just tell you to go to the census website. And so we're trying to figure out, like, how do we actually get our data to be not just machine readable, but machine understandable? How do we make our data crawlable? And just, like, again, how do we work with these bigger stakeholders? So kind of to your question of who we work with, we're literally working with everybody from think tanks, academics, startups, researchers, like all the stakeholders who kind of play into this space, and thinking about, like, what was our past open data strategy and how do we kind of meet the moment in AI? Another portion of my position is supporting our CTO and others in our commerce leadership and thinking through our overall AI strategy, like, internally within commerce. So a little bit more related to the, like, OMB memo that had come out along with the AIEO. So what does it mean to have like our own secure models internally within commerce to kind of do better discovery of the data that we sit on, that's not open to the public? What are our policies for employees for using Gen AI within Department of Commerce? Or how do we think about using AI within our hiring processes, and, like, who are we leaving out by utilizing that, and what are the things we need to ensure when we're using those like that type of technology, to not, like, leave out, like, the neurodivergent and the people who don't have, like, very traditional backgrounds and things like that, which has been really fun to work on, because that was, like, I'm very dedicated to, like, talent, getting AI talent and or just, like, tech talent into government, and that's been something I've been working on for a long time. So thinking through how these emerging technologies will kind of, like, affect that line of work, very fun. And then, just, like, at a very high level, as everyone has seen, the Commerce has lots of responsibilities in the AIEO that came out, and we all kind of, there's very few of us who are working on AI within the department, so we're all kind of just helping each other navigate that space and get that long list of things done.
Lovely, thank you. Alex, over to you. How is AI showing up in your work, and who are the types of folks that you talk to about AI?
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of a nonprofit that builds AI literacy curriculum. So we're spending most of our time working in schools with school district leaders, with tens of thousands of teachers. And then, as it's best described, as almost like the education ecosystem. So if you think about all the folks that are involved in, or who will be involved in helping the education system evolve, and whether it's a pivot or an evolution, we'll see. But basically step up to all these new challenges that AI is going to pose for the education system. We build curriculum, and so our theory of AI education is not a class called Introduction to Artificial Intelligence, in the same way that we don't have a class called Introduction to Google. It's a horizontal technology that's applied across all of the student's entire learning experience. So we embed modular curriculum that's standards aligned into math, science, English, and social studies, in addition to computer science. So education is in many ways like the front lines of this. If you think about most Americans, their interaction with ChatGPT has been driven by their kids are using it to write essays. Whether or not that's cheating is, I think, a question that we need to answer. It is going to dramatically reshape the skills that we're going to need. The University of Pennsylvania and OpenAI did some research in the spring, and they were looking at what are the jobs that have significant exposure to large language models. And if you look at the list, it's a frightening list. It includes financial analysts, writers, designers. These are not small mathematicians, data scientists. These are not like small niche careers. These are really broad-based skill sets that apply to dozens of careers. You think about, what is someone in business school studying to do? I mean, it is financial analysis. And as we're watching the capabilities of these tools evolve. And I think the really important thing is this idea that it's not just about ChatGPT being good at, X, Y, or Z task. It's the fact that ChatGPT can now use tools. So when you go and, like, if you look at my background here, I used DALL-E and GPT-4. So not 3 or 4 months ago, there was an entire industry around prompt engineering for AI art generators, and people were publishing prompt books and selling them for hundreds of dollars. And a lot of that is really out of date now, because you can have a semantic conversation with ChatGPT. It designs the prompt. It then goes and uses the AI tool. It can use web browsing tools. It'll eventually be able to use calculators. So I think where we sit is in this kind of uncomfortable tension where, we don't want to scare people, and we don't know enough about whether we're going to hit some sort of technological roadblock. So there's like a lot of reasons why ChatGPT or rather language models might not continue to progress in a linear fashion, whether we run into technical limitations in terms of compute or limitations in terms of our ability to actually find high quality data. But so far, what we're finding is that a lot of those barriers that would suggest that this is something that might be more episodic and similar to different past hype cycles, we're not reaching those yet. And so I think we really need to come to terms with this really important conversation about, the way we talk about the future of work, the way we talk about career pathways, the way we talk about what students even need to learn is going to have to change. The way we talk about computer science is going to have to change. And so when I think about like communication, it's one of the most important components of even the work in education, because there are all of these stakeholders and they're incumbent stakeholders. And if we don't want them to be resistant to the necessary evolution they're going to have, we have to get very smart about how do we talk to them about this technology in a way that is inclusive and makes them feel like part of this project, as opposed to simply the folks who are going to be disrupted out of whatever position or role that they have.
Right. No, yes, wonderful. I kind of building off of that, I wonder, since you work with educators, as you were saying, I'm interested in how those questions, what kind of questions are they asking you, and how have those questions changed, especially in the last year or so? Kind of for all of you, for all of the folks that you've been working with, Victoria and Clarence and Alex, like, how have the questions people have been asking about AI, how have those changed recently?
I think going along with what Alex is saying, I feel like I especially as a person who's kind of working on the side of innovation and embracing innovation while also definitely relying on people in our department to kind of figure out guidelines of like risk management and safety and security and things like that. I think I struggle with a lot of the, just like in the media, I think especially like the doomsday kind of speak, and the fact that we are going to have like issues with job loss and et cetera. But as Alex was kind of saying, I think there needs to just be like an acknowledgement of the place that we're in with the technology, and that it is now integrating in every facet of our lives. And no matter what, we're going to just have to like kind of come to terms with where we are and educate, like kind of how Alex is saying, like educate young people on like how to meet the moment and how to integrate with these tools. And I think I kind of struggle with like a lot of the conversations being around how it's going to destroy things, but not, which I think is very helpful with getting things like the AIEO out and getting people around investing time into setting the standards and the frameworks. But I also think it kind of gets people to struggle with the other sides of it, like investing in innovation, research and development, and like really understanding like how we should be kind of meeting the moment a bit. So I think that's been like kind of the biggest difference, is like as people are hearing more about it, a lot of the conversation is mostly around the things that are going to really suck about it, which there are definitely potentially a lot of things that will, but
yeah, no, for sure. Clarence and Alex, have you been also like meeting that kind of tension of like the kind of very negative risk focused, which is not, as Victoria put very succinctly, is not like necessarily a bad thing, but a bad thing to focus on. But how do you approach that tension in when you're communicating about AI in your work?
Go ahead, Alex.
So I think this is actually like Eleanor, you'll have to you'll have to forgive me for maybe trying to inject a little bit of controversy into this panel. Those are the best panels, right? So I would say this, like when we're talking to teachers and we're talking to people who ultimately, what we need to do is convince them that that they need to be seeking out opportunities to learn and empower themselves with the skills and the tools and the knowledge. Because, you know, like the analogy that I've been using a lot is, you know, computers are like a bicycle for the mind. You know, language models, generative AI, these are supercars. You can be the best cyclist in your city. You roll up to the starting line with like rippling muscles. You've been training for years, and below average student rolls up in their Corvette Z06. And before the starting gun goes off, you know who's going to win that race. And so irrespective of this question of like, should we be using AI in schools? There's some big problems. I think there's going to be tremendous challenges with learning loss. It does get in the way of building foundational skills as far as we've seen, unless tools are specifically designed to mitigate that, and still the research is out. But we know that you're going to have those skills. So that's kind of the in terms of comms, we have to find a way to strike this positive note. However, I really am not comfortable with this. You know, I've been in the AI space since 2015, and you know, from the moment I joined the space, there's this sort of like mantra of, well, we got to harness the benefits and the upside while mitigating the risks, and jobs will be created, or jobs will be destroyed, yes, but jobs will be created. We don't even know what jobs are going to be created. I think that's a bit of a cop out. I think it is possible that, yes, this is going to be similar to other technology transitions, but it could look very different. And what we're seeing right here is the gamut of skills that are that language models can replace are very broad. And this may not be job loss, but it could be wage depression. You also don't need to like have 50% of software engineers get laid off for this to be a crisis. I mean, it would be more like 5 to 10%. And that alone would be enough to force, you know, hundreds of thousands of students who are thinking about going into computer science fields to start to rethink what that means. And if you're not getting into a tier 1 school, you may not have good opportunities to get a job. And then the final thing that I think we really need to be talking about is there's an NBER study that was looking at when does capital investment tend to concentrate in automation, and they were looking at like job polarization, so like the erosion of the middle class due to like offshoring and mechanization of factories, and they found that like something like 88% of that happens in the 12 months following a recession, and so we haven't had a recession for 15-ish years. And so there's this, I think, really important question of when the next recession happens, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 years from now. Companies are going to have these incredibly powerful tools at their disposal that are going to enable them to significantly reduce their headcount. And you know, I worry about there's like that you don't want to scare people off, but you also don't want to misrepresent the challenge and make this feel like, well, this is all just a wash. Like we can just sort of like, you know, just trust us, trust the techies, we'll figure this out. Like I really do think this is an all hands on deck moment. And I'm even coming to this panel hoping to learn about what does it look like to have a honest conversation that's not necessarily pessimistic and doomsday, but also not anyways, I'll stop there. Clarence, I don't know. Maybe you can bring us back from that really dark place.
No, I don't know. I mean,
you
know, this is been in a couple conversations over the past like week and a half with some really, you know, really smart folks. You know, I think it's all right. And I like also like there's a lot of questions that are coming up. I do think there are folks that are like on the one hand scared by some of these things. Other folks are really optimistic. I think what is true is like there's still it's a lot of prognostication. It's like folks really we don't know. Like we are living in like this is, you know, I'm maybe classify, you know, I'm elder millennial, which, you know, I was like the first time I heard that term, I was a little taken aback. But you know, this is like the third, kind of like the really third like big like tech transition, you know, if you know, that I've lived through in my lifetime, which is kind of wild to say. And like the second, which I will like just peg as maybe, and others might quibble, is like kind of Web 2.0, was really where I was like more formative years and maybe able to like really remember like a lot of the things that we thought were going to be true around some of those tools, some of which came to pass, and then a lot of things I think that like I could not have foreseen personally, right? Like just the creation of influencer of like these influencer roles, right? Like what a big like you know, like you see kids at a pretty young age, right, who like want to be these influencers, and maybe in some ways it's just like, a different form of like actor or whatever. But it just like could not, foresee that myself like 15 years ago is like what a big like industry that was. It's just like one example. I think we thought these tools in many ways, if you go back to Tahrir Square, Iran Green Revolution, right? Like we thought these tools would actually be really strong arbiters of like democracy, right? Elevating voices. And we've seen some of that. I don't know that like, and there were certainly some folks at the time, I was pretty deep in the space, but not as like thoughtful around kind of the misinformation and really like tools of autocratic regimes, which in some cases I think are winning out, and how these tools are used. And so there's just so much we don't know. It was interesting. Alex brought up, it was at this dinner I was at earlier this week, and we were all getting ready to go. And, just some guy, tossed out this really interesting question that got folks re-engaged. And was like, I have two kids who are starting college right now. They asked me, what should I major in? What should I tell them? And it's, in many ways, we could bat that one around a little bit, but, it was just so fascinating hearing the different answers around the table, because just like this moment is like so disruptive. And I do, I don't know, that we know exactly where we're headed, but it is also, I think maybe to Alex's point, like it's not something that is necessarily like we are passive actors within. Like this is a conversation in a moment, like we can help shape a lot of that. I will just say one thing. I think that like, and as Alex said, he's been in space since 2015. I would say at the beginning of the Biden administration, right? Like Dr. Nelson, Alondra Nelson, who folks may know was running OSDP, came in with a vision to do this AI Bill of Rights. Kind of the chat GPT conversation was not, this generative AI was not in the water at that time. Like I would say, like as one of the folks who got a chance to kind of touch that and work on it, like we were thinking about kind of, more predictive, kind of algorithms and other automated systems, not these breakthroughs, which are now, and it's interesting because I do think like AI in some ways, like when people say that now, I think a lot of folks, at least and this is an interesting one for the journalist here, right, kind of referencing really shorthand for GPT or something like that now. And I do think it's like, it would be helpful for us to really continue to hold a much broader conversation and a recognition for folks that these tools have been in our lives for a decade plus now, right? Like that are making decisions, and really what the AI Bill of Rights was trying to say, in many cases, making decisions about what resources and things that we are able to access, right? Whether that's loans at a bank, whether that's housing, things like that, that we have had no transparency around, right? Like that we're not quite sure, like where the data is being pulled from, how the decisions are being made. And so that was really, so I just want to say that like, while there are questions around kind of existential concerns, right, there are some near-term things and some things that folks have been grappling with for a while that I hope we don't lose sight of as well. Sorry, Eleanor, I don't even remember your original question, so
No, that's great.
forgive my screed there, but hopefully it was, it's interesting.
Yeah, no, for sure. You're pulling me in two different directions. One is like, should we kind of talk about potential mirrors with like the rise of the internet and stuff like that? But I want to kind of push against the instinct to go really big and to get really small and practical instead, at least for the purposes of this panel. I wonder what, I mean, this has come up in your answers of like, AI meant a different thing. It's like automated decision system, right? Like the understanding of what this term is talking about has dramatically shifted in the past year, because generative AI doesn't really fit under the legal structure of automated decision system. I wonder, Victoria, especially since you have worked in what I'm sure is a very intense environment of the speaker's office, where you have to like constantly be getting up to date very quickly on new tech issues. I wonder, how do you very practically go about vetting sources, or like where do you look to for information on new technologies? In the past, how did that change in your current position? Like how, when the generative AI stuff started coming up, where did you look for information?
Honestly, it's come from like so many different places. And I think there's like when I was first, especially when I was working in the speaker's office, getting up to date on like just any emerging technology. So at the time, I think that was like it was 2020, and that was like the NSCAI was coming and doing a lot of like discussions with the Hill. And I think there was like a couple of really interesting like algorithmic accountability bills, like shout out to B's work on that in their past life. But I think that for me, a lot of it's like honestly just finding people on Twitter, finding like who are like the key people who I know a lot about that particular topic, or like oftentimes like journalists play such a big part for me, just being able to look through whatever, if there's like an article that's like on AI, I usually go through and see who they're quoting and who like who they think the most important people are. And it's such a shame that like Twitter/X is going into like a really interesting direction, and I don't know what that even is going to look like in the next 3 years. But that has been like a really useful tool for me. But there's been a lot of other emerging voices. I feel like I follow Last Week on AI, or Last Week in AI. They do like a podcast, which to be honest, like needs a little work, but their written version of the podcast that links to all of the individual things that are happening in AI has been really, really helpful. And I think podcasts have been probably the biggest thing for me, just because I am a person who likes to like listen and do other things. And so usually when I'm actually talking to new people or like people who are just getting involved in the technology and like wanting to learn new things, I'll send them like Ezra Klein's podcast on AlphaFold, so like the protein folding structures used for like vaccine and drug development and curing diseases and stuff. That podcast is like a really good introduction to like the impact in like science and research, and it doesn't really focus on the ChatGPTs and the BARDs and the things that people are normally seeing in the news, but kind of like what are the scientific impacts that we could have, and like where's like kind of like the positive direction that we could be going. So I think for me, it's a little bit all over the place. A lot of it's kind of based on people and the fact that there are like tons of experts right now out in the ecosystem who are in industry on the ground, able to kind of like inform all of us people in the government on like the day-to-day of how things are kind of going.
No, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing specific resources. Alex or Clarence, do you have like where do you turn when you, or what resources do you send to folks who are trying to get up to date on this dramatically changing conversation?
I'll be quick because I see Alex has a lot of resources that he dropped in the chat. I mean, I think similar to Victoria, I mean, I feel like you're asking me to expose my information diet, which is not good.
Only what you're comfortable sharing.
You know, big podcast person, same, and it is just so, there's just so much out there right now. It is honestly kind of hard to narrow, right? Like if you wanted to go really deep on kind of the technical aspects of it, like there's so much content. I think, I am a bit more on kind of the the application side. I would just plus one. I think Ezra Klein, who's like, his podcast is kind of high on my like daily or weekly rotation, did a series of conversations, including one with Dr. Nelson, who I mentioned earlier, which I thought was just a really a challenging kind of provocative conversation, I think, in like how to talk about this stuff without fear mongering, and in a very practical. I think she has such a great perspective on how this is, in some, certainly in many ways, this is new technology, obviously, right? But we do have a lot of tools and frameworks that are a bit like technology agnostic that to begin from, and we need to like patch, repair, what have you, or whatever language you want to use around kind of where future proof, what have you, I don't know. But I just found that to be like a very kind of practical conversation. And then similar, and I saw Alex dropped a lot of links in there. As much as I'm trying to like wean myself off Twitter, like there's still not a better place for both sports, like live sports content, and then also the unfortunate thing is, like, in this moment, I have seen a lot of the like trusted voices that I have for years followed around a lot of these issues have left that platform and have dispersed to other places. So it is a bit much more fragmented ecosystem that in the moment that makes it a little bit more challenging to kind of find the trusted voices and the folks that I've followed for years. Sorry, Alex.
No. I mean, honestly, like I think this. So first of all, Victoria, I think you nailed it. Twitter. I would add Reddit. I would add Discord. And that's not where I go for trusted voices, where I'm trying to figure out how do I conceptualize and talk about these technologies in a coherent and cogent way for people. I would say like a lot of the researches that Clarence mentioned or that Aspen puts together, I mean, that's really where we should be turning is, and Clarence, to your point, like this is not the first time that we've had to translate a complex technology to a broader audience. And so I think learning from best practices there is critical. But what Twitter and Reddit, and I hate Reddit, it's a cesspool, and I also have misgivings about Twitter, but the pace of these technologies, it's moving so fast. I mean, like 6 months ago, I would be giving, I was listening to podcasts and people were talking about, in 3 to 5 years, we're going to have text to photorealistic animated video, and it's going to replace TV shows. And Stable Diffusion and Pika was just released this week. And, it's actually one of the things in one of the links that I shared. And you watch this demo and it's like, oh, we're there. I mean, it's just happened. And there've been other, I think for me, Reddit's important because it's basically a bunch of nerds trying to jailbreak ChatGPT and try to push it to its limits. And so it's a great way to actually understand some of the risk vectors. I wouldn't point my mom or a teacher there necessarily, but I think for me, being able to have a coherent conversation with an educator about like, what do the risks actually look like? I mean, it really helps to get away from, like hypothetical, theoretical concepts to like, let me just give you an example of what somebody did last week that I read. The other thing that I want to say, this is like, and I'm actually curious for the panel's take on this, is like, I think one of the biggest challenges that we face in terms of communications is the fact that, I read somewhere, this was last week, 99.9% of ChatGPT users are not paying for Plus. So that means 99.9% are using the free version, which means they're using GPT 3.5. And my concern is that everybody's, GPT 3.5 is pretty cool, but it's not amazing. It doesn't replace, I'm not able to use it to actually replace real work. GPT 4, which is what you get when you pay for Plus, it actually, I can I do write grant proposals and I don't have to edit sometimes at all. I copy and paste. Now I spend time prompt engineering, but the point is it's much more powerful. And so the challenge that we face is not, like almost everybody, virtually everybody has not seen the powerful tools that we have seen. And they are also operating completely understandably through this environment where Silicon Valley has misled us time and time again. I mean, we heard about the metaverse, we heard about NFTs, we heard about blockchain and crypto. And I think for a lot of people, they are rightfully asking the question, is this really going to be a conversation that we're having 2 or 3 years from now, or is this just the flavor of the day? So I see that to be like the foremost challenge, is convincing people that this is, and Clarence, when you talked about that executive order being one of the longest in history, that's one of the things that I mentioned, is like, there was no executive order on the metaverse. And so we already have some signals that I think can help people sort of like digest that this is truly a technology paradigm shift that probably looks closer to like the internet or the Wright brothers' first flight. But their spidey senses are tingling, and I can understand why.
Alex, I completely agree with you. I was saying the exact same thing to a friend, like that ChatGPT, like 3.5 is like 0 comparison in my mind to 4. And I think for a lot of the people that I interact with now who kind of say what you say about like they don't like see the impact just yet, I feel like, again, like using super concrete examples of ways in which it's already changed our world. So like I was listening to this professor kind of talking about like the concept of precision medicine, and the fact that like in the past doctors are typically, they've just been like kind of guessing based on their own experiences, and that's like how they do a lot of their diagnosis for their patients. But now, based on like there's no more guessing anymore in medicine. Like a lot of the time they can use models to basically optimize the pathway for diagnosis and like therapeutic intervention. And that's like it's like a crazy concept to me, thinking about like my past and like going to the doctor and having it just be like based on whatever doctor I get, that's how I will be diagnosed. And now it's like so much more based on the patient itself. And just using an example like that, or what we've already been doing on climate change, like using satellite data to be able to predict like when wildfires will start and what the magnitude will be and things like that. I think get people actually to thinking about what it will be like in 3 to 5 years. But for the people who are just interacting with ChatGPT, like the free version, I just like don't think they're seeing where it can kind of take us, and the kind of good and, again, the bad of what that might look like in the next 3 to 5 years. But yeah.
Are there other like you mentioned like grounding things in examples, which I think is great, because AI kind of by itself doesn't really mean anything. It's just such a huge umbrella term. Are there other communication tips that you all would give to folks trying to like both learn about these technologies and communicate about them in a way that doesn't kind of fall into these traps of like buying into industry hype while also being like grounded in how tools are actually being used today? We have kind of like the example, like grounding things with examples. Are there other like communication tips that you would gravitate towards?
Honestly, when I was telling my niece about this, she was coming to visit me for Thanksgiving. I was like keeping up with all the OpenAI drama on Twitter. And honestly, I feel like the AI ecosystem is just so fun. Like it's almost like watching like Congress, where there's like all these like different players, and I feel like I also just getting her really involved in the ecosystem through just like telling her about all the drama with like Sam Altman, and like kind of making it about the people and who are building it, and like Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and their, or Meta, and their kind of like influences, and like what's driving them, and Google and like their products, like they're building data commons, like this public resource where you can kind of like do in-depth visual analysis on data, which is super interesting. But like kind of like who the key players are and what's like of interest to them, I think also kind of gets people in a little bit more invested than just saying like, here's a cool tool, but making it a little bit more about like the people and the potential risks, and making it a little bit juicier for the average person, because obviously this stuff is super wonky when you get to the nuts and bolts of it.
Alex, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think that the Victoria, this idea of ChatGPT is like, it's doing a lot of our work for us, right? I mean, like AIEDU, we used to spend most of our time like raising awareness about AI education and AI literacy, and we'd take meetings with whoever was willing to make time for us, and they'd be like, well, what even is AI? Now they may not know anything about AI, but they at least are hearing about it. And so if you think of it, that is a huge asset for us, that we have like this opening to actually build knowledge, whereas before we had to create the opening. What's worked best for me is just like you have to show them. You can't tell. Like you just have to like, and a lot of my presentations, I was just at the Gates Foundation before here, and I was running like a workshop, and the way I described this was like, I was like, imagine, I'm your nerdy cousin, and this is the holidays, and I'm at the kitchen table, and I'm just like I'm gonna like, imagine you're coming and sitting down next to me, and I'm just gonna show you a bunch of cool stuff. And I think people have responded really, really well, in some cases viscerally, to just seeing some of the examples for themselves. And then most importantly, give them the chance to build something that is culturally or contextually relevant to their work or what they do. Because once someone sees how they can use ChatGPT, or they can use Midjourney to create something that they find cool or interesting or useful, that's something that we could only have dreamed of 2 years ago. When we were thinking about how do you teach kids about artificial intelligence, I mean, literally our version of that was a 9-week course where they had to basically train a logistic regression model. It was a very powerful asset. I think there are responsibilities involved, and you need to give them some guidance so that they're able to use it safely. But yeah, I mean, just getting hands-on is like, it's both. Yeah, I think that's one of the key pieces.
Yeah, no, totally. That makes sense. They've got like kind of going from having people actually interact with the tools that we're talking about to like grounded in their own experiences. We're talking about sticking with examples of how those tools are being used by other people out in the world. And as Victoria mentioned, highlighting the people, like the actors that are using these tools. Like there isn't just an AI out there that's kind of sentient and nebulous and like going to solve all your problems. They're all these are created by people, right? And there's drama and goofiness associated with that. I'm going to start to pivot us into your lovely audience Q&A. And just for everyone watching along at home, we will compile all the resources that have been shared so far and send it out as a follow-up email. So don't feel like you have to like desperately copy paste things from the chat. We got you. So pivoting to audience questions, when talking about AI, how can we use language that empowers people to avoid being passive observers and assuming kind of this like negative, everything's inevitable, like this is just this is not the way the person phrased it, but like just submitting to like the kind of negative Silicon Valley kind of how would you use language that empowers people and makes them active?
I mean, I don't know that I have a great answer around language. I mean, I think so much of this comes back to, the thing that in Victoria and Alex mentioned. I think the way to empower folks is to, um, you know, bring it down from the, 30,000-foot level. And it's really like those tangible hands-on examples. I mean, I think that's like the beauty of a chat GPT or something like that, right? You can viscerally, get something like, oh, hey, here's what this is, right? Like, go ahead, ask it a question, right? Like now let's like, and so I think for me, that's the piece in a way that, as Alex was mentioning before, something like blockchain or metaverse, that was like, it was very abstract. There was a certain, like, there was a high threshold to even begin to like engage with something like that. So it feels very far off, in a way that I think you can kind of personalize the, the experience that folks have with these tools, as one way. I don't know, maybe others have a better example around language, but I do think it's, some of those, it's like getting folk experience, and then, having some examples, right, where folks have already, experienced it, and maybe hopefully had a good experience with it. Uh, so I don't know.
I always found blockchain stuff extremely confusing. I will just say that about myself. And didn't really feel like I could talk to people about it because I felt very silly not understanding it. Um, Alex and Victoria, do you have tips on how to communicate with folks about AI in a way that empowers them to like ask those silly questions and feel like they belong at the conversation, like belong at the table having the conversation?
I think as Alex like kind of alluded to, I think it really is just meeting people where they are and kind of relating it to their particular interests and things that they like, their industry and their ecosystem and their life. Because usually like I don't usually use like the example of like climate change or medicine or something when I'm talking to my dad who works like in bill collecting. And so I feel like it's really about creating that safe space, as we call it, of using language that doesn't, I don't know, scare people away, and also makes them feel very comfortable just asking silly questions, and also not getting mad if someone says AI instead of machine learning, which I kind of really, those types of people, I'm like, you're not making this a welcoming like experience or whatever, for people. And obviously we're all learning. And as we talked about earlier, a lot of the language is changing over time. And we are kind of like creators of our own reality. And so if we want to use certain terminology for certain things, like that is okay. And people shouldn't be kind of like shamed for those specific things, as long as they have like an understanding of like what they need to live their lives. But yeah, I think a lot of it's just kind of creating that safe space for people, and allowing them to be able to kind of ask those silly questions, and not tearing people apart on Twitter if they use the wrong, silly thing in their tweet. So life's too short.
Alex.
Yeah, and I usually, I mean, I usually, whenever I'm doing, let's say, demos or presentations, I'll often try to use a tool that I haven't played with until, in one case I did a presentation where I was just using Anthropic 2 for the first time, like 15 minutes before the presentation. And I did that on purpose because I think it's important for people to understand that everybody is basically at the beginning of their learning journey. I mean, maybe I've had a couple months, head start, but nobody's an expert on language models. And even the people who build the language models, they themselves can't explain exactly how, I've done OpenAI did a workshop with our organization back when they first gave us a grant, and we were expecting like, a really deep dive, like how we're going to become power users. And basically they were just like, you know what, it kind of comes down to experimentation. Like you just need to get comfortable with trying something, and the best way to learn is just to experiment. The secret sauce is experimentation plus domain expertise. So find an area that you know well. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's cooking or sports or whatever it is, and then start using AI in that domain, because you're going to be best equipped to identify the issues of hallucinations, but you're also going to figure out, like, there are some use cases that just aren't great use cases, and there are some really amazing use cases, and any attempt to create like a playbook would be rendered out of date too quickly. So that's a challenge from a learning perspective, because obviously curriculum is going to have to be updated in real time. But I think it also creates this opening, because anybody can really have entree to this. Like, there is no technical barrier anymore in terms of using the tools. If you want to build an AI model, well, that's a different story, but very few people will be actually building the models. Even fine-tuning models, we just did this hackathon. It's all semantic language. You just sort of like provide colloquial instructions to the wrapper, and so that is the glass half full perspective on all of this. Is yes, it's like really complicated, it's moving fast, but truly the barriers that we face with computer science education don't exist anymore. And there are challenges, but there are, I think, significant opportunities. And if we think about that and through the lens of equity and really focus on that, I think that there could be a lot of upside.
For sure. Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to pivot to another question from the audience. How can we talk about AI in ways that consider different sociocultural contexts rather than having only an American-centric, Silicon Valley-centric view? Does that come up in any of your day-to-day?
I mean, I guess it comes up in my day-to-day in the sense that I spoke about before. I spend a lot of time with nonprofit organizations, many of which are working with folks who I mentioned before are, above, below that kind of 200% below the federal poverty line, right? So folks from a, different socioeconomic background who need, whose maybe near-term needs are different, whose engagement with these types of tools, um, I'm not going to say well, I would say maybe limited, or is comes from a different perspective, right? So, I think to me, so much of this has to be rooted in like what problems are you solving for folks, and not just like me certainly, but like the organizations that are working with folks, like, and this is true, right? Like, this is only any of this only means something, right, if you're delivering value for someone, right? And like, value is different depending on what your background is, where you're situated in the world, what types of resources you currently have access to, what your goals and aspirations are, right? And so I think, for me, it's like getting proximate to those folks, getting proximate to folks who maybe have a different set of questions that they want to ask and want answered by these tools, to begin to expand what they can do, how we experiment, et cetera. And so that to me comes back a bit to what I talked about before. I mean, so much of historically, what has been the lead, and what, it will probably continue to be the lead, right, is like, we end up solving the problems for the folks that have the resources, that are the first movers, right? What we're trying to do here, right, is to bring some of that to folks who maybe aren't necessarily part of these conversations, and don't always have the resources, or cultural or social capital to be part of those conversations, right? And so how do we help bridge that in some ways and in this moment? So I don't have like a blanket answer, but I guess my like kind of like AI agnostic answer is, understanding what problems and challenges the folks are dealing with, and how do you make the tool, whatever it is, tech or not, relevant to them.
No, that totally makes sense. It's that has been like a theme of this entire conversation, right? Like, or it has felt that way to me, of just rooting all of these conversations about very technical topics in examples or things that actually mean something to the people that you're trying to communicate with. Since we are approaching 1, I would like to give all of our panelists time for any last thoughts, anything that you would like to kind of close this out with. No pressure, obviously, but any burning thoughts, there's something you wanted to say but couldn't say because of the flow of the conversation. All right. Yeah, thank you all. I will end us a couple of minutes early. Thank you all folks who are watching for your wonderful questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to too many of them. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for a great and like wide-ranging discussion that still felt like we were really, I don't know, grounded, talking about like how to get things done. Thank you for sharing all of your resources. And again, we'll share those out with attendees in an email follow-up to this event. So thank you, Victoria, thank you, Alex, and thank you, Clarence, for your time and expertise. And yes, thank you everyone for joining us for this panel.